Welcome to Educational Bedtime, where history unfolds gently in the quiet hours. If this journey through time brings you comfort, consider subscribing to join our community of curious night wanderers. Tonight we're stepping through the heavy oak doors of Tudor England's most magnificent palaces, but we won't be joining the courtiers in their silk and velvet. Instead, we'll walk in the worn leather shoes of those who made the glamour possible. The servants whose lives were bound to the whims of kings and queens, whose stories have been whispered in corridors but rarely told in full. Imagine yourself not as a noble guest at court, but as one of the hundreds of men and women who rose before dawn to light fires, prepare meals, empty chamber pots, and navigate the treacherous waters of royal favor. Their world was one of hierarchy and hardship, where a single misstep could mean dismissal or death. Over the next 2 hours, we'll explore 4 different windows into this hidden world. First, we'll experience the grinding daily reality of palace service, feeling the ache in your back from carrying heavy loads and the constant anxiety of serving unpredictable masters. Then we'll witness history through a servant's eyes as Anne Boleyn's world crumbles around her. We'll discover the secret architecture of Hampton Court and the ghostly legends born from its hidden passages. Finally, we'll peek behind the velvet curtains to see how the Tudor elite truly lived in their private moments. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and prepare to discover why the golden age of the Tudors was anything but golden for those who served in its shadows. Chapter 1. Why you wouldn't last a week as a Tudor servant. The abbey bell has not yet rung for lords when rough hands shake your shoulder. 4 in the morning, and already the head groom is barking orders in the darkness. Your straw mattress, shared with 3 other stable boys, offers no comfort as you force your aching body upright. The stone walls of your chamber breathe cold into your bones, and there's no time to coax warmth into your stiff fingers before the work begins. Imagine yourself stumbling through corridors lit only by occasional torches, their smoke stinging your eyes as you make your way to the kitchens. The hierarchy of service is as rigid as the stone beneath your feet, and you are near the bottom. Above you stretch layers upon layers of authority. The Lord Chamberlain, the groom of the stool, the yeomen, the gentlemen servers, and dozens of others whose favor you must court and whose displeasure you must avoid. Your first task is always the same, banking the fires that died during the night. The great fireplaces of the palace consume wood like hungry beasts, and it falls to you to feed them. Your arms strain as you carry load after load of split oak and ash, the rough bark scraping your palms raw. The wood room is a maze of towering stacks, and you quickly learn to judge by weight and sound which pieces will burn bright and which will merely smolder. The kitchen fires are the most crucial. Here, in the vast stone chambers that echo with the clanging of pots and the sharp commands of the master cook, the day's meals begin to take shape before most of the palace has stirred. You watch the cook's apprentices knead enormous vats of dough, their arms moving in rhythm as they prepare hundreds of loaves. The air grows thick with flour dust and the yeast-sweet smell of rising bread. But the reality of kitchen work extends far beyond the romantic notions of bustling hearths. The head cook, often a man who has clawed his way up from scullery work, rules his domain with absolute authority. His leather apron bears the stains of 1,000 meals, and his hands, scarred from knife cuts and burns, move with the precision of a surgeon. You learn to read his moods by the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes when supplies run short or when a dish fails to meet his exacting standards. The preparation of a single royal meal requires coordination that would challenge a military commander. Consider the feast for Twelfth Night, where the court expects dishes numbering in the dozens. Buttered, whole oxen must be roasted on spits that require 4 men to turn, their muscles straining against the weight of slowly cooking meat. Dozens of capons hang in neat rows, their skins basted with mixtures of wine and herbs, until they gleam like burnished gold. The master cook's voice cuts through the chaos, directing apprentices with the authority of a general commanding troops. As a lowly servant, your domain is not the preparation of food, but the endless cleaning that follows. Picture yourself scraping grease from massive roasting spits, your clothes becoming heavy with the smell of mutton fat and burnt drippings. The rushes on the floor, meant to absorb spills and cushion feet, become sodden with waste and must be changed constantly. You gather armloads of the soiled reed matting, trying not to breathe too deeply as you carry it to the midden heaps outside the palace walls. The great hall presents its own challenges. After each feast, the floor becomes a battlefield of spilled wine, dropped food, And worse, nobles and their guests show little consideration for the surfaces beneath their feet, and it's your hands that must clean what their carelessness creates. You scrub wine stains from stone floors, knowing that any mark left behind will earn you a cuffing from the hallkeeper. The trestle tables, groaning under the weight of countless dishes just hours before, now stand bare and stained, waiting for your cloth and elbow grease to restore them to cleanliness. Water is both your tool and your burden. Every drop must be carried from wells or rivers, hauled in heavy buckets up endless flights of stairs. Your shoulders develop permanent grooves from the rope handles, and your back learns the particular ache that comes from lifting and carrying all day long. The palace's numerous chambers each require fresh water for washing, and the great kitchens consume barrels of it for cooking and cleaning. In winter, ice must be broken from the well surfaces, and in summer the water grows warm and stale in its containers before you can deliver it to its destination. The logistics of water supply in a Tudor palace staggers the modern imagination. Hampton Court, in its heyday, housed over 1,000 people during major court gatherings. Each person requires water for drinking, cooking, washing, and sanitation. The elaborate conduit system, fed by springs miles away, represents one of the engineering marvels of its age. Yet even this sophisticated network requires constant maintenance. You learn to identify the sounds that indicate blockages, the subtle changes in water pressure that signal problems in the system. Personal service brings you into closer contact with your betters, but proximity to power is a double-edged blade. You learn to empty chamber pots without flinching, to pretend not to hear the private conversations of lords and ladies as you lay their fires or change their linens. The intimate details of noble bodies become routine, their skin conditions, their personal habits, their bodily functions, but you must maintain the fiction that you see and hear nothing. The chamber pot, that most humble of vessels, becomes central to your daily existence, made of pewter for the wealthy, of earthenware for the common. These containers hold secrets as well as waste. You learn to read the evidence of illness, the signs of pregnancy, the traces of exotic medicines imported from distant lands. The contents speak of feast and famine, of health and disease, of the human frailty that unites servant and master. Yet you must empty these vessels with the same blank expression, whether they belong to a kitchen maid or a duchess. The hierarchy among servants is as complex as that of the nobles they serve. Senior servants jealously guard their privileges and duties, and newcomers like yourself must navigate an intricate web of alliances and rivalries. The head cook might take a liking to you, ensuring you receive better scraps from the kitchen, but this favor could earn you the enmity of other servants who see you as a threat to their own advancement. The gentlemen of the chamber look down upon the grooms of the stable, who in turn consider themselves superior to the scullery maids, who nevertheless hold power over the lowliest kitchen boys. Your clothing marks your status as clearly as any coat of arms. The coarse wool of your doublet, dyed in browns and greys that hide the inevitable stains, speaks of your position before you utter a word. The rough leather of your shoes, resoled countless times, carries you through miles of corridor walking each day. Simple cap that covers your head, worn and shapeless from constant use, proclaims your place in the world's order. In winter, these garments offer little protection against the stone-cold dampness that seeps through every wall. The seasonal challenges of palace life test endurance in ways that modern comfort has taught us to forget. Tudor winters bite with a ferocity that penetrates stone walls and wooden shutters. Your breath forms clouds in the air as you work, and ice frequently coats the interior walls of less important chambers. You learn to wrap rags around your feet inside your shoes, to stuff straw inside your doublet for extra warmth, to sleep fully clothed when the wind howls through the palace corridors. The great fireplaces that warm the state apartments create drafts that actually make the servants' quarters colder, drawing warm air away from the spaces where you try to rest. Summer brings its own torments. The same stone walls that chill in winter trap heat like ovens when the sun beats down. The rushes on the floors develop a sickly sweet smell as they decay in the warmth, and the lack of windows in many working areas creates stifling conditions that would challenge the hardiest constitution. They work in chambers where the air shimmers with heat, where sweat drips constantly into your eyes, where the simple act of breathing becomes laborious. Sleep itself becomes a precious commodity, often interrupted by urgent summons, a lord's sudden craving for wine, a lady's need for fresh linens, a kitchen fire that threatens to spread, All can drag you from your brief rest. A few develop the ability to function on fragments of sleep, snatching minutes of rest wherever you can find them. The bell that calls you to matins at midnight seems to ring just moments after you've closed your eyes, and the bell for prime follows with cruel swiftness. The sleeping arrangements for servants reflect the rigid hierarchy that governs every aspect of palace life. The most senior servants enjoy private chambers, small but their own, with actual beds rather than straw pallets. The gentlemen of the privy chamber sleep in antechambers near their masters, ready to respond to any nighttime summons. Lower servants share dormitory-style rooms, sometimes sleeping four to a bed for warmth, their possessions stored in simple wooden chests that serve as both furniture and security. The constant threat of dismissal hangs over every action. A broken dish, valued at more than your annual wages, a spilled drink on precious fabric, an overheard comment reported to the wrong ears. Any of these could see you cast out of the palace with nothing but the clothes on your back. In a world where employment means survival, the loss of your position could mean death by starvation or exposure. The roads outside the palace gates are littered with former servants who made single mistakes, their lives serving as warnings to those who remain. Yet perhaps more terrifying than dismissal is the possibility of being caught up in the political intrigues that swirl constantly through the court. Servants see everything, hear everything, and this knowledge makes them dangerous. You learn quickly that ignorance, or at least the appearance of ignorance, is your safest shield. And lords whisper in corners, you make yourself invisible. When ladies exchange meaningful glances, you focus intently on your sweeping. The art of selective blindness and deafness becomes as essential as any other skill required for survival. The political upheavals of the Tudor period created particular dangers for palace servants. Religious changes under Henry VIII meant that servants who had served in monasteries suddenly found themselves in households where their former loyalties made them suspect. The executions of prominent nobles swept away not just the condemned but entire households of servants who had committed no crime beyond association. You learned to read the political weather with the same attention that farmers pay to approaching storms, adjusting your behavior to match the shifting winds of royal favor. The physical toll of this life shows itself in bent backs, gnarled hands, and faces aged beyond their years. As your fellow servants bear the marks of their labor, like battle scars, burns from kitchen fires, calluses from endless scrubbing, shoulders that slump permanently forward from carrying heavy loads. The repetitive motions of daily work create deformities that mark the profession, curved spines from endless bending, enlarged knuckles from gripping rough tools, eyes weakened by working in poor light. Yet they also possess a quiet resilience, an ability to find small pleasures in their harsh existence. The injuries common to palace work would fill a physician's manual. Kitchen servants suffer burns from flying grease and scalding water, their arms marked with scars that tell the story of 1,000 small accidents. Stable hands bear the imprints of horse hooves and the strain of lifting heavy saddles, their legs often bearing permanent indentations from kicks. Laundry workers develop hands cracked and bleeding from harsh soaps and constant immersion in water, their skin aged to leather consistency before their 30th year. Meals for servants are simple affairs: dark bread, thin ale, and whatever scraps can be claimed from the nobles' leavings. You learn to be grateful for a piece of meat fat or a crust of white bread that has fallen from a lord's plate. Hunger becomes a constant companion, a gnawing presence that sharpens your awareness and makes every morsel precious. The quality of food available to servants varies dramatically based on their position in the hierarchy, with those closest to the kitchens enjoying better fare than those relegated to the stables or gardens. The servants' hall, where meals are taken in communal silence or whispered conversation, becomes a microcosm of the larger palace society. Seating arrangements reflect status as rigidly as those in the Great Hall, with senior servants occupying positions of honor near the high table. The food itself tells stories, yesterday's roast appearing as today's pie filling, fine wine watered down to servants' drink, expensive spices used sparingly to flavor otherwise plain fare. You learn to eat quickly, knowing that hesitation might mean the difference between satisfaction and hunger. The rhythm of palace life shapes your days into a blur of repetitive tasks. Bell after bell marks the hours of prayer, the times for meals, the schedule of duties that governs every moment. You rise in darkness and often work until well past sunset, moving through your tasks with the automatic precision born of endless repetition. That, the canonical hours that structure monastery life extend their influence into the secular palace, creating a framework of time that governs both spiritual and temporal activities. The palace operates on schedules that would challenge modern efficiency experts. Meals must be served at precise times, regardless of delays in preparation or obstacles in service. The morning breaking of fast requires coordination between kitchen staff who began work before dawn, servers who must arrange the Great Hall, and musicians who provide entertainment during the meal. Any disruption in this carefully orchestrated sequence creates cascading problems that affect every subsequent activity. Personal hygiene, that concern which modern life takes for granted, presents constant challenges in the Tudor palace. Bathing is a luxury reserved for special occasions, requiring the heating and transportation of enormous quantities of water. There, you learn to maintain cleanliness through other means, changing linen undergarments when possible, using perfumed waters to mask odors, employing herbs and flowers to freshen clothing and living spaces. The palace's public areas must be kept sweet-smelling despite housing hundreds of people with limited washing facilities. The laundry operations of a major palace rival those of a commercial enterprise. Thousands of pieces of linen require regular washing, from the finest table linens to the humblest servant's shirt. The laundry maids work in conditions that combine the worst aspects of kitchen and stable work, standing over vats of boiling water in poorly ventilated chambers, their hands raw from harsh soaps made from animal fat and ash. The process of washing, drying, and pressing garments requires constant attention to weather conditions and available space. Disease spreads through palace communities with terrifying speed. The crowded living conditions, poor sanitation, and constant contact between servants create perfect environments for contagion. You witness the swift progression of illnesses that can empty entire departments of workers, leaving the remaining servants to shoulder impossible workloads. The sweating sickness, that mysterious ailment that strikes without warning, can kill within hours, transforming a bustling household into a place of mourning overnight. The medical care available to servants ranges from non-existent to rudimentary. Minor injuries are treated with traditional remedies. Herbs gathered from palace gardens, poultices made from bread and milk, prayers offered to patron saints of healing. Serious injuries or illnesses often mean dismissal, as employers cannot afford to maintain workers who cannot perform their duties. You learn to hide pain and illness, working through conditions that would incapacitate those accustomed to easier lives. The economic realities of servant life create webs of debt and dependence that extend far beyond the palace walls. Your wages, paid irregularly and often in kind rather than coin, must support not only yourself but often family members in distant villages. The cost of your livery, deducted from your pay, can consume months of earnings. Small loans between servants create networks of obligation that complicate personal relationships, turning friendships into financial entanglements that can explode into bitter feuds. The opportunities for advancement exist but require navigation of treacherous political waters. A servant who catches the attention of powerful nobles might find doors opening to better positions, but the same visibility that enables advancement can also invite destruction. You observe servants who rise quickly through the ranks, their success breeding resentment among colleagues who see favoritism rather than merit. The most successful servants master the art of being simultaneously indispensable and invisible, valuable enough to retain but not threatening enough to eliminate. The seasonal migrations of the Tudor court create additional challenges for palace servants. When the royal household moves between residences, enormous quantities of furniture, clothing, and household goods must be transported. You find yourself part of caravans that stretch for miles, responsible for precious items whose loss could cost your life. The logistics of moving hundreds of people and their possessions require planning that begins months in advance, with servants responsible for every detail from packing to unpacking. As we drift deeper into this world of service and submission, imagine the weight of exhaustion settling into your bones, the way your muscles learn to move even when your mind grows distant with fatigue. This was the reality for thousands of men and women who made possible the golden age we remember, their lives a shadow cast by the brilliance of the court they served. In their struggles, we glimpse the true cost of Tudor grandeur, paid not in gold but in human endurance. Day after grinding day, their sacrifices built the foundation upon which royal magnificence rested. their forgotten names deserving remembrance alongside the monarchs they served. The palace's grandeur was purchased with their sweat, their silence, their unwavering dedication to maintaining illusions that transformed mere mortals into figures of divine authority. In understanding their struggles, we begin to comprehend the true architecture of power, built not merely of stone and timber, but of human dreams and human suffering, aspirations and disappointments, woven together into the tapestry we call history. Chapter 2: Anne Boleyn's Final Days. A Servant's Witness. The year is 1536, and you find yourself in service to Anne Boleyn, Queen of England. But the title that once commanded reverence now feels like a burden she carries with diminishing grace. In the chambers of Greenwich Palace, where you tend to her personal needs, the atmosphere has shifted like weather before a storm. The laughter that once echoed through her apartments has grown forced, brittle as autumn leaves that crackle underfoot in forgotten gardens. Imagine yourself as one of her personal attendants, privy to the private moments that history would forget. You know the weight of her crown not from its gold and jewels, but from watching her shoulders sag when she thinks no one is looking. You've seen her hands tremble as she signs letters, witnessed the way she starts at unexpected sounds, noticed how she's begun to question the loyalty of faces that once smiled readily in her presence. The very air in her chambers has grown thick with unspoken fears, each shadow seeming to harbour threats that multiply with every passing hour. The morning rituals of dressing the Queen have become exercises in careful navigation. As you help her into her elaborate gowns, you feel the tension in her body, the way she holds herself rigid as if armour could protect her from whispered accusations. Her choices in clothing have grown more deliberate, deeper necklines to draw attention away from her still flat belly, richer fabrics to maintain the appearance of royal confidence. Each garment becomes a statement, each jewel a declaration of her continued power. Yet you notice how her fingers shake as she selects her ornaments each morning. The process of dressing Anne requires nearly 2 hours. Beginning with the finest linen camise that touches her skin, you observe how she examines this intimate garment each morning, checking for stains that might suggest the monthly bleeding that would dash hopes of pregnancy. The absence of such signs brings no relief, only renewed anxiety about the king's growing impatience. Her body has become a political battlefield, every function scrutinized for signs of the male heir that alone can secure her position. You help her into the rigid stays that shape her torso, pulling the laces tight enough to create the fashionable silhouette, but loose enough to accommodate any early signs of pregnancy she desperately hopes to discover. The French hood that frames her face, once worn with such confidence that it started fashion trends throughout Europe, now seems to weigh heavily upon her head. You adjust its placement with practiced care, knowing that the slightest imperfection will be seized upon by those who watch for signs of her decline. The black velvet and gold embroidery that once proclaimed her sophistication now feel like mourning clothes worn before death, a prophetic choice that makes your hands tremble as you arrange the delicate pearls that edge its borders. The positioning of this headdress has become a daily struggle, as Anne's hair grows thinner with stress, requiring increasingly elaborate arrangements to maintain the illusion of abundant tresses. The selection of jewels each morning reveals the depth of her desperation. Where once she chose ornaments for their beauty, now every piece carries political significance. The bee pendant that Henry gave her during their courtship, now worn as a talisman against his changing affections. The ruby necklace that once proclaimed her status, now selected to draw attention away from the dark circles beneath her eyes that no amount of ceruse can fully conceal. You watch her hands shake as she fastens these ornaments, each clasp a prayer that today might bring better news, that somehow the tide of opinion might turn in her favor. But you know better than most how fragile that power has become. In the quiet moments when you brush her long dark hair, you hear her murmured prayers, words spoken so softly they might be mistaken for breathing. She prays for a son, for the king's continued affection, for the silence of her enemies. Her hair, once her pride and called the most beautiful in England, has begun to thin with stress, and you've learned to arrange it carefully to hide the places where anxiety has taken its toll. The silver mirror reflects a face that grows more haggard with each dawn, though you apply cosmetics with increasing skill to disguise the toll of sleepless nights. The morning hair-brushing ritual has become an intimate confession. As you work the bristles through the dark strands, Anne speaks of dreams that wake her in terror, of courtiers who no longer meet her eyes, of letters from the king that grow shorter and more formal with each passing week. She tells you of the phantom pains in her belly, the cruel, false hopes that make her believe she might be carrying the prince England needs. These conversations, held in whispers that barely disturb the morning air, reveal a woman fighting a losing battle against forces she cannot control. The perfumes and pomades you apply each morning tell their own story of desperation. Where once a light touch of rosewater sufficed, now you layer scent upon scent, musk and ambergris, trying to mask what you both know cannot be hidden. The tremor in her hands grows more pronounced as you work, and sometimes you catch her staring at her reflection with eyes that no longer recognize the woman looking back. The elaborate preparations that once brought her joy now feel like painting a corpse. Each application of powder and rouge, a futile attempt to restore life to features marked by fear. The cosmetics themselves tell stories of desperation. The ceruse that whitens her skin contains lead, a poison that promises beauty at the cost of health. You watch her apply it more thickly each morning, covering not just natural color, but the grey pallor that sleepless nights have brought to her complexion. The kohl that darkens her eyes, imported at great expense from distant lands, now serves to hide the redness of tears shed in private moments. Rouge made from crushed cochineal beetles provides color to cheeks that have lost their natural bloom, but no amount of artifice can restore the vital spark that once made her the most captivating woman in England. The servants' network carries information faster than any official messenger, and through whispered conversations in corridors, you learn of the charges building against your mistress. Yodletree, they say. Treason. Names are mentioned: Mark Smeaton, the musician whose fingers you've seen tremble on the lute strings; Henry Norris, who brings gifts and stays too long; even her own brother George, whose easy charm has always seemed dangerous to those who understand the weight of appearance. Each name spoken in hushed tones feels like another nail being driven into an invisible coffin. Mark Smeaton, that handsome young musician whose talent elevated him from humble beginnings to royal favor, becomes a particular source of anxiety. His father was a carpenter in Southwark. His mother took in washing to pay for his musical education. You've watched him perform in the Queen's chambers, his fingers dancing across lute strings with the same delicate precision you use when arranging her jewels. The music he creates fills the room with melodies that seem to ease the tension in Anne's shoulders, yet now even his most innocent performances feel fraught with danger. You notice how his eyes never quite meet hers, how his hands shake when he thinks no one is watching, how he starts at every unexpected sound. The music that once brought joy to these chambers now sounds like a funeral dirge, each note weighted with implications that make your skin crawl with apprehension. The relationship between Anne and her musicians has always been one of the few sources of genuine pleasure in her increasingly constrained life. Music provides escape from the relentless pressure of court politics, allowing her to remember the cultured young woman who once charmed the French court with her sophistication. You've observed her during these musical interludes, watching as the tension leaves her face and something approaching peace settles over her features. Yet now even these moments of respite feel dangerous. Every song potentially twisted into evidence of improper relationships, every shared glance transformed into proof of adultery. Henry Norris represents a different kind of threat, his very virtue making him dangerous in a court that sees conspiracy everywhere. As groom of the stool to King Henry, he holds a position of intimate trust that places him above suspicion under normal circumstances. His kindness to Anne, once seen as courtly courtesy, now feels like evidence of deeper attachment. You've watched their interactions with growing alarm, noting how his genuine concern for her welfare could be misinterpreted by those seeking evidence of impropriety. The gifts he brings, books of poetry, exotic fruits from the royal gardens, small tokens of friendship, all carry implications that transform innocent gestures into potential weapons against both giver and receiver. The political context that makes these relationships dangerous extends far beyond personal attraction. Anne's marriage to Henry required breaking with Rome, challenging papal authority, and fundamentally altering England's relationship with Catholic Europe. The failure to produce a male heir threatens not just her personal position, but the entire religious and political revolution that brought her to power. The failure to understand, through whispered conversations among the more informed servants, that powerful men like Thomas Cromwell see in Anne's destruction an opportunity to reshape England's foreign policy, perhaps even to reconcile with Rome under more favourable terms. You watch Anne's face when these men visit her chambers, searching for signs of the guilt that others claim to see so clearly. What you observe instead is a woman growing increasingly isolated, her natural flirtatiousness curdling into desperate attempts to maintain influence. Her conversations with courtiers have become performances, each word carefully chosen, each gesture calculated for its effect on observers who might report back to the king. The wit that once charmed Henry into breaking with Rome now feels sharp enough to cut, each clever remark a potential weapon that could be turned against her. Even laughter has become dangerous, spontaneous joy now seen as evidence of inappropriate familiarity with men who are not her husband. The French sophistication that once made Anne irresistible to Henry now works against her in an England increasingly suspicious of foreign influence. Her education at the court of Margaret of Austria, her years of service to Queen Claude of France, her fluency in French language and customs, all now mark her as potentially treasonous. Sure, hear whispers among English servants about foreign ways, foreign loyalties, foreign corruptions that have supposedly infected the royal court. The very cosmopolitanism that elevated her above other English women now makes her vulnerable to accusations of betraying English interests. The change in the other servants' behavior tells its own story. The eager deference they once showed begins to waver, replaced by a careful neutrality that speaks volumes. They still bow, still address her as Your Majesty, but their eyes no longer meet hers directly. They've begun to hedge their bets, protecting themselves against the possibility of serving a condemned woman. You watch long-time servants find excuses to avoid her chambers, their loyalty evaporating like morning mist when faced with the heat of royal displeasure. The speed with which dedicated servants abandon their mistress reveals the terrible arithmetic of survival in Tudor England, where association with the fallen can drag down even the innocent. Margaret Wyatt, one of Anne's most trusted ladies-in-waiting and the daughter of the poet Thomas Wyatt, begins to distance herself with subtle but unmistakable signals. Her family's own complicated relationship with Anne, marked by her father's rumoured romantic attachment to the Queen before her marriage, makes continued association particularly dangerous. Where once she lingered for private conversations, now she completes her duties with efficient haste. Her smiles become mechanical, her responses carefully neutral, her eyes constantly shifting toward the doors as if planning escape routes. You recognize the signs of someone preparing to abandon a sinking ship, and the knowledge that even Anne's closest companions are calculating their own survival fills you with a dread that settles in your bones like winter cold. The atmosphere among the ladies-in-waiting becomes poisonous as former friends compete to distance themselves most effectively from their mistress. Lady Worcester, who once competed for the honour of holding Anne's train, now finds reasons to avoid public appearances with the Queen. Lady Rochford, married to Anne's brother George, begins making subtle comments about inappropriate behaviour she claims to have witnessed. These women who once formed Anne's intimate circle now eye each other with suspicion, understanding that any one of them might be called upon to provide testimony that could save their own lives at the cost of their former friends. The bonds of feminine solidarity that once provided comfort in the male-dominated world of court now dissolve under pressure, leaving Anne increasingly isolated among people who know her most intimately. You find yourself caught in an impossible position. Loyalty to your mistress wars with the instinct for self-preservation that has kept you alive in the dangerous world of court. When officials begin questioning servants about Anne's private habits, her visitors, her conversations, you realize that your intimate knowledge of her daily life has become a weapon that could be used against her, or against you. The very skills that made you valuable as a servant, your ability to anticipate needs, to remember details, to observe without seeming to watch, now mark you as potentially dangerous to those who would reshape the story of Anne's downfall. Every morning you help her dress. Every evening you help her prepare for bed. Every private moment you witness becomes potential evidence in a case being built with careful deliberation. The interrogations begin in earnest, conducted in small chambers beneath the main palace, where the stone walls weep moisture and the air tastes of fear. This is, rooms originally designed as storage spaces have been converted into spaces designed to break Hammond's spirits through discomfort and intimidation. The lack of windows creates a sense of timelessness that makes every minute feel like an hour, while the dampness seeps into your bones and makes shivering an involuntary testament to your vulnerability. You're summoned by stern-faced men whose names you don't know but whose authority is absolute. They wear the plain black robes of lawyers, but their methods remind you more of inquisitors than legal scholars. Thomas Cromwell himself conducts some of these interrogations, his pale eyes missing nothing, as he dissects your responses with surgical precision. And son of a blacksmith from Putney, His rise to power demonstrates the opportunities available to clever men in Tudor England, but his methods reveal the ruthlessness required to maintain position in a world where today's favourite becomes tomorrow's traitor, and speaks quietly, never raising his voice, but the threat behind his words is unmistakable. His questions reveal an intimate knowledge of the Queen's daily routine, suggesting that others have already provided the information he seeks. You realize that you are not being asked to inform, but to confirm details that have already been decided. The transcription of your words by silent clerks creates a permanent record that could be used against you if your testimony later proves inconvenient. The questions themselves reveal the predetermined nature of the case being built against Anne. Cromwell doesn't ask whether improper relationships existed, but rather when they occurred, how often, and with what degree of intimacy. He doesn't question whether treasonous conversations took place, but focuses on their specific content and the number of witnesses present. These presumptions, embedded in every query, make denial seem like obstruction rather than truth-telling. You learn to pass your responses with the care of a diplomat, understanding that honesty might be less important than survival. The art of saying nothing while appearing to cooperate becomes a skill as essential as any other required for navigating the treacherous waters of Tudor politics. Your answers matter more than you ever imagined. Each word you speak could become evidence, could be twisted into proof of crimes you're not even certain you understand. Are the men questioning you write down everything, their quills scratching across parchment with sounds that seem to echo in the stone walls? You realize that your simple observations, a musician staying past the evening bell, a brother embracing his sister with perhaps too much affection, a queen accepting compliments from courtiers, are being woven into a narrative of betrayal that will justify the king's desire for a new beginning. The transformation of innocent moments into evidence of guilt demonstrates the power of interpretation to reshape reality itself. The specific questions asked reveal the careful construction of the case against Anne. Officials want to know about closed doors, private conversations, gifts exchanged, glances that lingered too long. They ask about the Queen's moods, her reactions to the King's absences, her comments about other women who might attract royal attention. Every detail of her private life becomes potentially significant. Every expression of frustration or disappointment transformed into evidence of disloyalty. You realize that the prosecution is not seeking to discover the truth, but rather to accumulate enough circumstantial evidence to create a convincing narrative of guilt. The most terrifying aspect of these interrogations is how your own loyalty becomes suspect. Officials probe not just what you saw, but why you didn't report it, why you didn't recognize the supposedly obvious signs of treason. Your silence, which you thought was discretion appropriate to your station, is now interpreted as complicity. The very qualities that made you a trusted servant, your ability to see without watching, to hear without listening, are now treated as evidence of your guilt by association. You learn that, in Tudor England, ignorance can be as dangerous as knowledge, and that servants are expected to spy on their masters while maintaining the fiction of loyal service. The legal framework being constructed around Anne's destruction reveals the sophisticated nature of Tudor propaganda. Her alleged crimes are defined as treason, not simply because they involve adultery, but because they threaten the succession, and therefore the stability of the realm. This elevation of personal behavior to the level of state security allows for punishments that would otherwise seem disproportionate, while creating legal precedents that will shape English law for centuries. You begin to understand that you are witnessing not just the destruction of an individual, but the creation of new definitions of loyalty and betrayal that will affect every subsequent generation. The atmosphere in Anne's chambers becomes increasingly suffocating as the investigation intensifies. Conversations stop when you enter rooms. Other servants avoid eye contact, afraid that any sign of familiarity might be reported to the wrong person. The Queen herself grows increasingly isolated, her requests for simple comforts denied or delayed as those around her distance themselves from her fate. Meals arrive cold, fires remain unlit longer than necessary, fresh linens appear less frequently. The 1,000 small services that once made her life comfortable begin to erode, each omission a small betrayal that signals her diminishing status. Even the dogs that once followed her through the palace corridors seem to sense the change, their behavior becoming nervous and unpredictable. The practical effects of this isolation extend beyond mere discomfort. Letters that Anne writes take longer to be delivered, if they reach their destinations at all. Messengers who once competed for the honor of serving her now find reasons to be elsewhere when her summons arrive. The elaborate network of communication that once kept her informed about court politics begins to break down, leaving her increasingly dependent on rumors and speculation. This information drought makes it impossible for her to respond effectively to the charges being prepared against her, creating a strategic disadvantage that compounds her legal vulnerabilities. You witness her growing desperation in small, heartbreaking details. The way she clutches letters from the king, reading them multiple times as if the words might change. Her increased attention to her appearance, as if beauty alone could save her. The books of devotion that appear on her table, prayers she whispers with increasing fervor, as if divine intervention might still alter her course. She begins hoarding small tokens, a ring given by Henry in happier times, a letter from her father, a pressed flower from her coronation bouquet, as if these objects could anchor her to a reality that grows more tenuous with each passing day. The desperate quality of these gestures reveals her growing understanding of how little control she retains over her own fate. The religious observances that she once approached with casual confidence now become desperate rituals. The Protestant faith that she helped bring to England offers little comfort in her extremity, its emphasis on divine predestination providing cold comfort to someone facing earthly destruction. You watch her kneel before her private altar for hours, her lips moving in silent prayer, while tears trace silver paths down her cheeks. The rosary that she fingers, despite the dangers of Catholic associations in Protestant England, provides a connection to the faith of her childhood. Her confessions grow longer, more anguished, as if the weight of unspecified sins could somehow explain the catastrophe engulfing her life. Yet even in prayer, she cannot find the peace that once seemed her birthright. The books that she chooses for private reading reveal her state of mind. Where once she favored poetry and courtly romances, now she turns to works of devotion and moral instruction. Thomas à Kempis's Imitation of Christ lies open on her reading table, its pages marked with tears that blur the ink. The margins of her prayer book fill with handwritten supplications, desperate bargains offered to a God who seems increasingly distant. You observe her copying passages about suffering and redemption, her handwriting growing more erratic as stress takes its toll on even these basic skills. The intellectual curiosity that once made her one of the most fascinating women in Europe now turns inward, seeking answers to questions that have no earthly solutions. Dr. Matthew Parker, her former chaplain, who now serves in a greatly reduced capacity, provides what spiritual comfort he dares. His position has become increasingly precarious as Anne's star wanes, and you observe their hushed consultations, noting how even this holy man glances nervously at doors and windows when he speaks with her. His sermons, once filled with references to divine favor resting upon anointed queens, now focus on acceptance of God's will and the virtues of suffering. The change in his demeanor reflects the broader shift in how everyone associated with Anne must recalculate their positions, their words, their very thoughts to align with new realities. Even spiritual guidance becomes a political act, requiring careful navigation between genuine pastoral care and self-preservation. The trial, when it comes, unfolds like a theatrical performance in which you've been given a role without knowing your lines. The Great Hall of the Tower of London, normally a place of ceremony and celebration, becomes a stage for judicial murder dressed in legal robes. The same space that once hosted Anne's coronation feast now witnesses her judicial destruction. The irony lost on no one who remembers that earlier, happier occasion. The servants are called to testify, to repeat conversations, and describe scenes that once seemed innocent, but are now painted as evidence of adultery and treason. You watch familiar faces take the witness stand, see people you've worked alongside for years, transformed into instruments of condemnation. The legal proceedings themselves reveal their predetermined nature through countless small details, the speed with which witnesses are called and dismissed, the lack of time allowed for careful examination of evidence, the absence of witnesses who might provide alternative interpretations of events, all signal that this is ceremony rather than genuine judicial inquiry. The judges, many of whom owe their positions to the king's favor, ask questions designed to elicit specific responses rather than to discover truth. You realize that you are witnessing not justice but theater, a performance designed to provide legal cover for decisions already made in private chambers far from public view. Mark Smeaton's confession, extracted under torture in the Tower's dungeons, provides the foundation upon which all other accusations rest. The young musician who once filled Anne's chambers with beautiful melodies now appears as a broken figure, his testimony delivered in a voice that shakes with more than fear. Do you remember him as a talented young man whose music brought joy to long winter evenings? But the figure who appears in court bears little resemblance to the musician you knew. His confession describes intimate encounters that transform innocent moments into evidence of treason. Yet the very mechanical nature of his testimony suggests words learned under duress rather than memories freely recalled. Do you realize that under sufficient pressure, any servant can be made to remember anything, truth becoming whatever serves the needs of those in power? The torture used to extract Smeaton's confession represents a deliberate departure from English legal tradition. The rack, that terrible device imported from continental Europe, breaks not just bodies, but the very concept of voluntary testimony. You understand through whispered conversations among court officials that Cromwell ordered this torture specifically to create the evidence needed for Anne's conviction, knowing that English law would normally prohibit such methods. The violation of legal precedent in service of political necessity demonstrates how completely the rule of law has been subordinated to royal will. Smeaton's destroyed body becomes a warning to other potential witnesses about the cost of insufficient cooperation. Some servants, facing threats to their own lives, embellish their testimony, adding details that make their stories more compelling to the court. Others, paralyzed by fear, can barely speak above a whisper. You realize that the truth of what happened in Anne's chambers has become less important than the story the court needs to hear. The story that will justify the king's desire for a new marriage, a male heir, a fresh beginning. The guilt or innocence of the accused matters less than the political necessity of their conviction. Justice becomes a luxury that England cannot afford, sacrificed on the altar of dynastic stability and royal convenience. The testimonies of other courtiers follow predictable patterns, each witness carefully avoiding any statement that might implicate them in the same web that has ensnared Anne. Henry Norris, that courtly gentleman whose only crime was kindness to a lonely queen, maintains his innocence even as the noose tightens around his neck. Has dignity in the face of certain death, provides one of the few moments of genuine honor in proceedings otherwise marked by cowardice and calculation. George Boleyn, Anne's beloved brother, faces charges so monstrous that their very existence reveals the depths of royal cruelty. The accusation of incest, that most unnatural of crimes, demonstrates how completely political necessity has overwhelmed human decency in the construction of this case. Anne's own trial takes place in the Tower's Great Hall, that same space where she once danced at celebrations following her coronation. The irony is not lost on those who serve her, watching as the location of former triumphs becomes the stage for her destruction. She conducts herself with remarkable dignity, her responses to charges delivered with the poise that once made her the most fascinating woman in Europe. Yet you know the cost of this composure, having seen her collapse in private moments when the weight of her circumstances threatens to crush even her formidable spirit. Her public performance of queenly dignity masks private terror that only her most intimate servants fully comprehend. The charges against Anne reveal the sophisticated legal framework constructed to justify her destruction. Adultery with multiple partners, conspiracy to murder the king, incest with her brother, each accusation carefully chosen to maximize moral outrage while providing legal grounds for execution. The prosecution presents these charges not as separate crimes, but as elements of a larger pattern of treasonous behavior, creating a narrative that makes individual acts seem part of a coordinated attack on royal authority. You understand that the specific truth or falsehood of particular accusations matters less than their cumulative effect in creating an impression of guilt that transcends legal technicalities. The morning of her execution arrives with a cruel brightness, the sun illuminating Greenwich Palace, as if this were a day like any other. The weather seems to mock the gravity of the occasion, clear skies and gentle breezes creating a perfect spring morning that contrasts sharply with the darkness of the events about to unfold. You watch from a distance as Anne is led to the scaffold, noting how she maintains her composure even now. Her final speech, carefully crafted to avoid any words that might be interpreted as defiance, reaches your ears across the courtyard. She speaks of the king's mercy, of her own submission to his will, words that reveal the impossible balance she must maintain even in her final moments. Even in death, she must perform the role of grateful subject, acknowledging the justice of her punishment while maintaining whatever dignity remains possible. The crowd that gathers to witness her death includes many who once competed for her favor, their presence serving as a reminder of how quickly fortune can reverse itself. You recognize faces among the spectators, courtiers who once hung on her every word, ladies who once imitated her fashions, servants who once considered themselves fortunate to serve in her household. Their expressions range from genuine sorrow to calculating satisfaction, each observer processing the spectacle according to their own relationship with power and mortality. The diversity of reactions among the crowd reflects the complex legacy that Anne leaves behind, a woman who inspired both passionate loyalty and bitter resentment, depending on one's perspective and interests. The French executioner, specially imported for his skill with a sword rather than the traditional axe, represents a final gesture of royal mercy. His fee, rumoured to be £23, demonstrates the king's willingness to spend considerable money to ensure that Anne's death proceeds without the botched attempts that sometimes accompany executions by less skilled practitioners. The irony that this expert in death provides the kindest treatment Anne will receive in her final days is not lost on those who truly knew her. His swift, clean stroke brings an end to the woman you served, but the manner of her dying, conducted with continental sophistication rather than English brutality, suggests that even Henry retained some remnant of the love that once consumed him. The immediate aftermath of the execution reveals the careful choreography that has been planned to manage the transition to a new queen. Within hours of Anne's death, her chambers are being cleared, her possessions catalogued, her very existence being systematically erased from the official record. You participate in this process, helping to pack gowns that still carry her scent, books that still bear her annotations, personal items that retain the warmth of recent use. The speed of this erasure demonstrates how completely her destruction has been planned, every detail anticipated and prepared to ensure that nothing remains to complicate the king's new beginning with Jane Seymour. The swift fall of the executioner's sword brings an end to the woman you served, but your ordeal is far from over. The remaining servants must be reassigned, their knowledge of the former queen's private life carefully managed. Some are dismissed entirely, their association with Anne making them unsuitable for further court service. Others are transferred to different households, their previous loyalty now a mark against them that will follow them for years. The practical problems of managing a royal household suddenly without its central figure create chaos that affects everyone from senior courtiers to kitchen maids. You find yourself part of a diaspora of former servants, each carrying memories and knowledge that the new regime would prefer to see forgotten. You find yourself questioned again in the days that follow, as officials work to ensure that no inconvenient details about Anne's final days might surface to complicate the king's new marriage. The official story must be maintained. She was guilty. Her punishment was just. Her servants were either complicit or ignorant. The complex reality of a woman caught in the impossible contradictions of her position, witnessed by servants who saw her humanity behind the crown, must be buried as thoroughly as her body. Memory itself becomes dangerous, and you learn to forget what you once knew as clearly as breathing. The art of selective amnesia becomes as important as any other skill required for survival in the new order. In the quiet moments of your new duties, serving a different mistress in a different household, you sometimes remember Anne Boleyn not as the adulteress of official history, but as a woman who prayed quietly while you brushed her hair, who startled at unexpected sounds, who faced her impossible circumstances with a courage born of having no other choice. These memories, held in the hearts of servants who witnessed her final days, preserve a more complex truth than any official chronicle would dare record. They remind you that behind every great historical narrative lie countless smaller stories, human moments of vulnerability and strength that resist easy categorization into heroes and villains. In remembering Anne as she truly was, rather than as history has chosen to portray her, you preserve something precious and true in a world where both are increasingly rare commodities. Chapter 3. Hampton Court's Hidden World, Secret Passages and Ghostly Legends. Let your mind drift now, from the immediate dangers of court politics, to the very stones that witnessed centuries of Tudor drama. Hampton Court Palace stands today, much as it did in Henry VIII's time. But beneath its familiar facade lies a hidden architecture of secrets, passages that carried whispered messages, chambers that concealed forbidden meetings, and corridors that still echo with the footsteps of those who walked them centuries ago. The palace that visitors see today, the grand state apartments, The magnificent Great Hall, the formal gardens, represents only a fraction of the building's true complexity. Behind the tapestries and beneath the floorboards, a shadow palace exists, designed for the servants, spies, and secret lovers who made Tudor court life possible. Imagine yourself exploring these forgotten spaces, running your fingers along walls that seem solid but conceal doorways known only to a trusted few. The sensation of discovering these hidden passages feels like uncovering the palace's deepest secrets, each concealed entrance revealing new layers of architectural deception. Your fingertips trace the almost invisible seams where secret doors blend seamlessly with wooden paneling, the craftsmanship so perfect that only those who know exactly where to look can detect the mechanisms that grant access to the shadow world behind the walls. The weight of these hidden doors, balanced on pivot points that allow them to swing silently despite their massive oak construction, speaks to the engineering genius of Tudor craftsmen who understood that power required invisibility. The discovery of these hidden passages began not with historians, but with curious maintenance workers in the 20th century. Picture them, flashlights in hand, following strange drafts and unexplained sounds through the palace walls. Their modern electric torches cut through darkness that had remained undisturbed for centuries, illuminating corridors where generations of servants had crept silently about their clandestine business. What they found was a network of narrow corridors, some barely wide enough for a single person, others opening into forgotten chambers that had been sealed for centuries. These spaces told stories that official records never mentioned, tales of eavesdropping, espionage, and clandestine romance that shaped the course of English history in ways that would never appear in official chronicles. The architectural survey conducted in 1986 by English Heritage revealed the true scope of Hampton Court's hidden geography. Using sophisticated measuring equipment and ground-penetrating radar, researchers mapped passages that snake through the palace walls like veins through a body. The total length of these hidden corridors exceeds 2 miles, creating a complete alternative circulation system that allowed privileged individuals to move through the palace without ever entering public spaces. The complexity of this network suggests planning that extended over decades, with each addition carefully integrated into the existing structure to maintain both functionality and secrecy. The engineering challenges involved in creating this hidden world would tax modern architects, yet Tudor builders accomplished this feat using only hand tools and mathematical principles passed down through generations of master craftsmen. The most extensive of these hidden ways runs behind the state apartments, allowing servants to move invisibly through the palace, while nobles conducted their business. Imagine yourself walking these narrow passages, your shoulders brushing against rough stone walls that bear the marks of countless previous travelers. Small openings concealed behind portraits and tapestries allowed servants to observe the great chambers without being seen. Through these spy holes they could anticipate their master's needs, appearing with wine or documents at precisely the right moment, as if summoned by magic. The illusion of supernatural service that so impressed foreign visitors was actually the product of careful observation conducted through these concealed vantage points. Servants could watch entire conversations, noting when goblets needed refilling, when documents required presentation, when their master's moods suggested the need for particular comforts or distractions. These passages served purposes beyond mere convenience. In a court where information was currency and secrets were weapons, the ability to move unseen was invaluable. Imagine courtiers using these hidden ways to conduct meetings that could never appear in official records. Lovers stealing through the darkness to forbidden encounters, spies carrying intelligence that could topple kingdoms. The very walls of Hampton Court became complicit in the intrigues that shaped English history, their concealed spaces providing the infrastructure necessary for the complex web of relationships that drove Tudor politics. The phrase "walls have ears" takes on literal meaning when you understand that Hampton Court's walls actually did have ears, strategically placed listening posts that allowed the gathering of intelligence on an unprecedented scale. The priest holes, discovered throughout the palace, reveal another layer of religious intrigue that permeated Tudor court life. These hiding places, some so small that occupants could barely stand, speak to the deadly serious nature of religious politics in 16th century England. During Catholic persecutions under Protestant monarchs, these spaces sheltered priests who risked execution for celebrating Mass. During Protestant persecutions under Catholic queens, the same chambers concealed reformers whose evangelical preaching could cost them their lives. You can almost feel the terror of those who hid in these cramped spaces, listening to the sounds of search parties moving through the palace above, knowing that discovery would mean death. The religious artifacts discovered in some of these hiding places, crucifixes, rosaries, forbidden books, tell stories of faith maintained in the face of mortal danger. The very existence of these spaces reveals how completely religious identity had become intertwined with political survival, making even private devotion a potentially treasonous act. Archaeological investigations have revealed the sophistication of this hidden architecture. Soundproofing techniques, using layers of fabric and hollow spaces, prevented conversations from being overheard by unintended listeners. The acoustic engineering required to create spaces where secrets could be shared safely would challenge modern architects. Yet Tudor builders accomplished this using materials and methods that seem primitive by contemporary standards. The ventilation systems, ingeniously disguised as decorative elements, ensured that people could remain hidden for hours without detection. The fresh air flowed through channels carved into the very stones of the palace, while stale air was drawn away through separate passages that prevented the accumulation of telltale odors that might reveal concealed occupants. The builders of Hampton Court understood that power required privacy, and they constructed the palace accordingly, creating a building that was simultaneously public monument and private fortress. One of the most intriguing discoveries was a series of chambers hidden within the palace's thick walls, rooms that appear on no contemporary plans, spaces that seem to exist solely for concealment. These chambers, some barely large enough for 2 people, others spacious enough to accommodate small meetings, were accessed through mechanisms so cleverly concealed that their discovery required systematic examination of every decorative element in the surrounding areas. Artifacts found in these rooms tell fascinating stories that illuminate the hidden life of the Tudor court. A lady's glove, embroidered with initials that historians have spent decades trying to identify, suggests romantic encounters that could have altered the course of English history if discovered. The silk is preserved by the dry atmosphere of the sealed chamber, its delicate stitching still visible after nearly 5 centuries. The initials, A, worked in gold thread, have sparked endless speculation about whether this belonged to Anne Boleyn, Anne of Cleves, or some other courtly lady whose identity remains lost to time. A musician's tuning fork, discovered in another hidden chamber, suggests that even entertainment required secrecy in the Tudor court. The bronze instrument, marked with symbols that may indicate its maker or owner, raises questions about why musical performances would need to be conducted in concealment. Perhaps it belonged to a Catholic musician who continued to perform religious music during Protestant persecutions, or to a Protestant reformer who used music to spread evangelical messages during Catholic restorations. The presence of sheet music fragments, written in a cipher that has never been decoded, suggests that even songs could carry dangerous political messages requiring the ultimate discretion. Music, that seemingly innocent art form, becomes another vehicle for the transmission of seditious ideas that could cost lives if intercepted by hostile authorities. Fragments of letters written in cipher, their meanings lost to time, reveal the sophisticated nature of Tudor espionage. The ciphers themselves represent various levels of complexity, from simple letter substitutions to elaborate codes that would challenge modern cryptographers. Some use astronomical symbols, others employ alchemical notation, still others create entirely new alphabets designed to confuse enemy interceptors. The paper on which these messages were written, often of the finest quality available, suggests that encrypted communication was not limited to lower-level agents, but extended to the highest ranks of court society. The discovery of cipher keys, painstakingly carved into wooden panels and stone surfaces, reveals the permanent infrastructure that supported ongoing espionage operations. These keys, invisible to casual observation but available to those who knew where to look, allowed the decryption of messages that might otherwise seem like innocent poetry or religious devotion. These hidden spaces gave birth to legends that persist to this day. The most famous is the ghost of Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's 5th wife, who allegedly runs screaming through the haunted gallery, trying to reach the chapel where the king was praying when she was arrested. But servants who worked in the palace's hidden passages tell of other spirits, figures glimpsed in corridors that shouldn't exist, voices heard in chambers that were supposedly empty, footsteps that echo through walls too thin to contain them. The story of Catherine Howard's ghost gains particular poignancy when you understand the palace's hidden geography. The gallery where she is said to appear connects to a network of passages that would have been familiar to her, routes she might have used for private meetings, ways she could have moved through the palace without drawing attention from those who watched her every public appearance. The account of Catherine Howard's final desperate attempt to reach the king takes on new dimensions when viewed through the lens of the palace's secret architecture. Historical records indicate that she broke free from her guards and ran screaming through the galleries, trying to reach Henry before her arrest could be completed. The traditional story focuses on her public route through the main corridors, but knowledge of the hidden passages suggests alternative interpretations. Perhaps her familiarity with secret ways allowed her to evade capture longer than official accounts suggest. Her intimate knowledge of the palace's concealed spaces providing temporary sanctuary in her final hours of freedom. The servants who first reported her ghostly appearances knew these passages intimately, and their accounts suggest that her spirit follows the same secret routes she used in life. The repetitive nature of her haunting, always the same desperate flight toward the chapel, suggests a woman trapped not just by death but by the architectural geography of her final failure. But Catherine Howard is not the only spectre said to haunt Hampton Court's hidden spaces. Servants report encounters with a figure known only as the Grey Lady, a woman in Tudor dress who appears in passages near the former Queen's apartments. Unlike Catherine Howard's frantic ghost, the Grey Lady moves with purpose, as if still carrying out duties assigned centuries ago. Her appearances, always in the early hours before dawn, coincide with the times when living servants would have begun their daily routines. Some believe she is the spirit of a lady-in-waiting who died during the plague outbreaks that periodically swept through the palace, her loyalty binding her to eternal service. Others suggest she might be one of Anne Boleyn's attendants, condemned to wander the hidden spaces where she once conducted the secretive business that cost her mistress her life. The Grey Lady's behavior, always purposeful, never threatening, suggests a spirit at peace with her circumstances, finding in death the same satisfaction in service that she knew in life. The plague outbreaks that periodically devastated Hampton Court created their own ghostly legends, rooted in historical reality. During the sweating sickness epidemic of 1528, the court fled Hampton Court, leaving behind servants and minor functionaries who lacked the resources to escape. Some of these individuals took refuge in the hidden passages, hoping that isolation might protect them from the contagion that was claiming hundreds of lives daily. The discovery of makeshift living quarters in some concealed chambers, complete with bedding, food stores, and religious artifacts, tells the story of people who chose secret imprisonment over almost certain death. Not all of these refugees survived, and the skeletons occasionally discovered in sealed passages may belong to plague victims who died in hiding, their bodies never discovered by their contemporaries. These forgotten dead, sealed away by the very architecture that they hoped would save them, may account for some of the palace's most persistent hauntings. The hidden passages also preserve evidence of the palace's use during times of religious upheaval. Secret chambers contained priest holes, spaces where Catholic clergy could hide during Protestant persecutions, or where Protestant reformers could shelter when Catholic queens held power. These hiding places, some so small that occupants could barely stand, speak to the deadly serious nature of religious politics in Tudor England. The artifacts discovered in these spaces, crucifixes, forbidden books, illegal religious vestments, tell stories of faith maintained in the face of mortal danger. Imagine spending hours in such a space listening to the sounds of search parties moving through the palace above, knowing that discovery would mean death. The religious graffiti carved into the walls of these chambers, prayers for deliverance, biblical quotations, personal messages to God, reveals the psychological state of people facing persecution for their deepest beliefs. Recent archaeological work has uncovered chambers that were deliberately sealed, sometimes while they still contained furniture, personal belongings, and even food. These time capsules offer intimate glimpses into palace life that no official record could provide. A half-finished piece of embroidery suggests a lady hastily fled her quarters, perhaps during one of the many political upheavals that swept through Tudor England. The silk threads still attached to the needle preserve a moment of domestic tranquility interrupted by external crisis. A child's toy, a wooden horse with wheels, abandoned in a servant's chamber, tells of families torn apart by political upheaval. The toy's placement, carefully positioned on a small table rather than carelessly dropped, suggests a child who expected to return but never did. A hidden stash of gold coins discovered behind a loose stone in a concealed chamber reveals the precarious nature of even high-ranking positions at court. The coins, bearing the marks of various European mints, represent wealth accumulated over years but hidden rather than spent. suggesting an owner who understood that today's favor could become tomorrow's condemnation. The palace's hidden geography also explains some of its most persistent mysteries. Strange sounds that echo through the building, cold spots that appear without explanation, and the sensation of being watched in empty rooms, all take on new meaning when you understand that Hampton Court was designed for concealment. The building itself encourages secrecy, its architecture creating spaces where the past seems to press close against the present. Modern visitors who report feeling observed in supposedly empty chambers may be responding to architectural features designed to allow concealed surveillance. The acoustic properties of the hidden passages can transmit sounds in unexpected ways, making voices seem to come from empty air while actually originating in concealed spaces. The psychological effect of these architectural mysteries helps explain why Hampton Court has always been considered one of England's most haunted buildings. The palace's design makes the presence of unseen watchers feel not just possible but probable, creating an atmosphere where supernatural explanations seem more rational than architectural ones. Modern investigations using ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging have revealed that the palace's secrets are far from exhausted. Anomalies in the readings suggest chambers that remain sealed, passages that have been forgotten even by the palace's own historians. Each new discovery adds another layer to our understanding of how Tudor courtiers lived, loved, and schemed within these walls. The 2019 survey conducted by Cambridge University's Archaeological Department identified at least 12 previously unknown chambers, some large enough to accommodate significant gatherings. The implications of these discoveries continue to reshape our understanding of Tudor court politics, suggesting that the hidden infrastructure for espionage and intrigue was even more extensive than previously imagined. Ground-penetrating radar has identified what appears to be a complete parallel circulation system, allowing movement between the palace's major sections without ever entering public spaces. This hidden network, if fully mapped, might reveal connections between chambers that were never supposed to be connected, relationships between courtiers that official records never acknowledged, political alliances that shaped English history from the shadows. The thermal imaging studies have revealed even more intriguing anomalies. Certain areas of the palace consistently register different temperatures than their surroundings, suggesting the presence of concealed chambers with independent ventilation systems. These temperature variations, invisible to the naked eye but clearly detectable by modern instruments, follow patterns that correspond to no known architectural features. Some of these thermal signatures appear to shift over time, creating temperature maps that change seasonally or even daily. The implications of these findings remain unclear, but they suggest that Hampton Court's hidden architecture may be even more sophisticated than previously understood. The possibility that some concealed chambers remain not just undiscovered, but actively concealed by mechanisms that continue to function after 5 centuries, challenges our assumptions about Tudor engineering capabilities. The servants who worked in these hidden spaces developed their own folklore, stories passed down through generations of palace workers. They spoke of rooms that changed size depending on who entered them, of passages that led to different destinations for different people, of doors that opened only at certain times of day. While these tales might seem fanciful, they reflect a deeper truth about Hampton Court, that it was a place where reality and appearance were carefully separated, where the official version of events concealed more complex truths. The psychological impact of working in an environment where nothing was quite as it seemed created a culture of storytelling that blended fact with fantasy, making it impossible to separate genuine historical events from elaborated folklore. Yet even the most fantastical of these stories often contain kernels of historical truth, details about hidden chambers, secret meetings, or political intrigues that can be verified through other sources. The tradition of servant folklore at Hampton Court reflects a broader pattern in Tudor England, where those without access to official records developed alternative ways of preserving historical memory. The stories told by palace workers, passed down through generations of families who served the court, preserved details that would otherwise be lost to see. These oral traditions, while not always factually accurate in their details, often capture emotional truths about palace life that official chronicles deliberately omit. The folklore of hidden passages and secret chambers reflects the lived reality of people who understood that Hampton Court was fundamentally a place of concealment, where the most important events occurred behind closed doors and within concealed spaces. Their stories, fantastical as they sometimes seem, preserve insights into the psychological atmosphere of Tudor court life that no official document could convey. The hidden passages of Hampton Court also served as escape routes during the palace's most dangerous moments. When plague threatened, When political fortunes shifted, when religious persecution loomed, these secret ways offered salvation to those who knew how to use them. Imagine the fear and desperation of courtiers fleeing through narrow corridors, their lives depending on knowledge of routes that existed nowhere in official records. The emergency provisions discovered in some sealed chambers, water stores, preserved food, medical supplies, suggest that the palace's hidden spaces were designed not just for espionage and romance, but for survival during crisis. The strategic placement of these supply caches, always in chambers with multiple exit routes, reveals careful planning for contingencies that might require extended concealment. The escape routes themselves tell stories of successful and failed attempts to evade political persecution. Secret passages leading to the Thames provided water access that could bypass roadblocks and sentries, while tunnels extending beyond the palace grounds offered overland routes to sanctuary and friendly estates. The discovery of personal belongings in some of these escape routes, jewelry, letters, religious artifacts, suggests that they were used during actual emergencies rather than merely planned for hypothetical crises. Some of these objects bear the marks of hasty abandonment, clasps broken in the rush to remove them, papers torn and scattered, personal seals deliberately destroyed to prevent identification. The human drama preserved in these archaeological deposits brings immediate reality to stories that might otherwise seem like romantic fiction. The maintenance of these hidden passages required an infrastructure of trusted workers, whose loyalty could be guaranteed across decades of political upheaval. The secret knowledge necessary to operate concealed doors, to navigate dark passages, to locate emergency supplies, had to be passed down through generations of carefully selected servants. These individuals, bound by oaths that carried the penalty of death for violation, formed a shadow aristocracy within the servant hierarchy. Their special knowledge made them invaluable to their masters, but also made them targets for those who sought to penetrate the palace's secrets. The discovery of coded instruction manuals, hidden within the structure of the palace itself, reveals the sophisticated training programs that prepared servants for their roles in maintaining the hidden world. These manuals, written in ciphers that required years of study to master, ensured that essential knowledge could be preserved even if individual servants were compromised. As you settle deeper into contemplation of these hidden spaces, picture yourself walking through Hampton Court, not as a modern visitor, but as someone who knew its secrets. Feel the weight of hidden doors behind tapestries, the whisper of air from concealed passages, the presence of watchers behind seemingly solid walls. The palace becomes not just a building but a living entity, its hidden anatomy as complex and vital as the human dramas it contained. The sensation of being observed, reported by countless visitors over the centuries, takes on new meaning when you understand that Hampton Court was literally designed for surveillance. The architectural features that create feelings of unease in visitors once served practical purposes, allowing the monitoring of conversations and activities that could affect the security of the realm. In understanding these hidden spaces, we begin to comprehend the true nature of power in Tudor England, where information was gathered not through modern electronic means, but through human intelligence networks supported by architectural infrastructure designed for espionage. These secret spaces remind us that history is layered, that the stories we know are often built upon foundations of stories we don't. In the hidden passages of Hampton Court, the past feels immediate and present, as if the footsteps of Tudor courtiers still echo in the darkness, as if their secrets still wait to be discovered by those who know where to look. The palace's concealed chambers preserve not just artifacts and architectural features, but the very atmosphere of an age when survival often depended on knowing which doors opened onto public stages and which led to private worlds where different rules applied. The ghosts that are said to haunt these hidden spaces may be more than mere folklore. They may be the spiritual residue of intense human experiences that occurred in places designed to intensify every emotion, every fear, every desperate hope that power and privacy could somehow be reconciled in a world where both were necessary for survival, but neither could be guaranteed. In walking these hidden passages, even in imagination, we touch something essential about the Tudor age, that delicate balance between public magnificence and private vulnerability that defined the lives of everyone who sought to navigate the treacherous waters of English court politics. Chapter 4. Behind Velvet Curtains, How the Tudor Elite Really Lived. Now let us draw aside the heavy tapestries and peer into the private chambers where England's most powerful nobles spent their hidden hours. Here, away from the formal ceremonies and public performances of court life, a different world unfolds, one of intimate rituals, whispered conversations, and the quiet moments that shaped the destiny of nations. The Tudor elite, for all their public grandeur, were still human beings with bodies that ached, hearts that yearned, and souls that carried the weight of impossible expectations. Their private lives, conducted behind closed doors and within chambers designed for maximum luxury and minimum scrutiny, reveal truths about power that no public ceremony could convey. Imagine yourself not as a lowly servant now, but as a trusted chamberer, one of the select few allowed into the most private spaces of the nobility. Your discretion has been proven over years of service, your silence purchased with privileges that other servants could never dream of obtaining. You have become almost invisible in your familiarity, a living piece of furniture that moves through intimate scenes without disturbing the delicate fabric of aristocratic privacy. This invisibility, carefully cultivated through years of perfect service, grants you access to moments that would reshape public understanding of these powerful figures if they were ever revealed. Your very presence becomes a form of security, your reliability so absolute that nobles discuss their most sensitive affairs as if you were deaf and mute. The morning rituals of the great lords and ladies reveal the elaborate theatre required to transform mere mortals into figures of divine authority. Picture yourself helping to dress a duke, your hands steady as you lay a garment upon garment, each piece carefully selected not just for beauty but for the political messages it will convey. The fine linen undershirt that touches his skin, made from fabric so costly that its price could feed a village for months, represents the first layer of transformation from man to monarch. The doublet with its intricate lacework, each stitch representing hours of skilled labor, proclaims wealth that extends far beyond mere money to encompass the loyalty of craftsmen whose livelihoods depend upon noble patronage. The hose that must fit perfectly to display his legs to advantage, tailored with mathematical precision to create the illusion of physical perfection, transforms natural anatomy into idealized form. The gown that proclaims his status from across a crowded hall, its fabric chosen to catch light in ways that create an almost supernatural luminescence, completes the metamorphosis from human being to living symbol of authority. Each piece requires careful attention, for a wrinkle in the wrong place, or a poorly tied point could undermine the illusion of effortless nobility. The positioning of every element must appear natural, while actually being the product of careful artifice, creating the impression that such magnificence flows naturally from the wearer's inherent superiority. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate whether a particular outfit is achieving its intended effect, noting how the fall of fabric affects posture, how the weight of elaborate garments influences movement, how the psychological impact of transformation affects the wearer's confidence and bearing. The clothing becomes armor as much as ornament, protecting the wearer against the constant scrutiny that accompanies public appearances, while projecting the image of invincible authority that maintains political power. The undergarments of the Tudor elite reveal secrets that would shock their public admirers. Beneath the magnificent outer layers lie garments designed to address the intimate realities of human bodies that must appear superhuman. Special padding disguises physical imperfections. Strategic corsetry creates idealized silhouettes. Medicinal herbs sewn into linings provide protection against disease and infestation. You observe nobles examining their bodies each morning with the intensity of military commanders assessing battlefield conditions, noting every blemish that might require concealment, every sign of aging that must be disguised, every physical vulnerability that could be exploited by political enemies. The construction of the public persona begins with the most intimate details, each private decision about dress and grooming calculated to maintain the illusion of divine perfection that justifies earthly power. The ladies' chambers present an even more complex dance of transformation. You watch as a countess is literally built from the ground up each morning, the process requiring nearly 3 hours and the coordinated efforts of multiple servants. The camise of silk so fine it seems to glow in the candlelight, imported from Italian workshops whose secrets are guarded as jealously as state intelligence, touches skin that has been prepared with lotions and powders designed to create perfect texture and color. The stays that reshape her natural form into the fashionable silhouette, tightened with mechanical precision to create a waist so small it seems anatomically impossible, transform the female body into an object of art that bears little resemblance to natural human form. The farthingale that transforms her movement into a stately glide, its hooped construction requiring careful engineering to achieve the desired effect, creates a physical barrier that prevents casual contact while ensuring that every gesture appears deliberate and ceremonial. The process of face painting that transforms natural features into porcelain perfection, requires skills that rival those of master artists. You observe the careful application of ceruse, that white lead mixture that creates the fashionable pallor associated with nobility, but slowly poses those who wear it. The substance must be applied with perfect evenness, each layer building upon the previous one to create a surface so smooth it reflects light like polished marble. The eyes receive special attention, darkened with kohl that emphasizes their size and depth, creating an intensity of gaze that speaks of passion barely contained beneath aristocratic reserve. Rouge applied with sable brushes, made from the fur of animals hunted in distant forests, brings color to cheeks in patterns that mimic the flush of natural health, while actually representing hours of artificial construction. The final effect transforms the human face into a work of art, beautiful but also somehow removed from ordinary humanity in ways that reinforce the distance between ruler and ruled. But these intimate dressing chambers also serve as spaces for the most important conversations of the day. As you arrange a lord's ruff or adjust a lady's sleeves, you hear discussions that would shake kingdoms if they were spoken aloud in public, and marriage alliances are negotiated over the selection of jewels, the choice of a particular gemstone carrying messages about political loyalties that only the initiated can decode, and trade agreements discussed while examining the fall of a gown, the economic implications of fashion choices extending far beyond personal preference to encompass national interests, and military strategies debated as hair is arranged and rearranged until it achieves the perfect height and curve, each styling decision reflecting careful consideration of how appearance will affect the reception of policy proposals. And the privacy of the dressing chamber creates sanctuary where masks can be temporarily lowered, allowing the discussion of topics too sensitive for more public venues. The selection of jewelry each morning reveals the sophisticated nature of Tudor political communication. Every gemstone carries symbolic meaning. Every setting conveys particular messages. Every combination creates statements that informed observers can read like carefully composed letters. You watch as nobles consider the political implications of their ornamental choices, understanding that a ruby might signal support for one faction while an emerald could indicate allegiance to another. The positioning of particular pieces, a ring worn on a specific finger, a brooch placed at a certain angle, conveys information to those who understand the symbolic vocabulary of aristocratic display. Some ornaments carry hidden compartments containing miniature portraits, locks of hair, or folded papers that allow the transmission of messages too dangerous to entrust to conventional communication methods. The jewelry becomes a language unto itself, allowing complex political negotiations to be conducted through seemingly innocent fashion choices. The private dining customs of the elite reveal their humanity in ways that public feasts never could, and their personal chambers, away from the rigid protocols of the Great Hall, nobles eat with their fingers like common folk, lick their plates clean when a sauce pleases them, and argue over the last morsel of a favorite dish. You serve these intimate meals, watching powerful figures relax into their natural selves, observing behaviors that would scandalize their public admirers. A duchess who saves the best portions for her lapdog, feeding the animal from her own plate while courtiers vie for her attention. A duke who insists on cutting his own meat because he trusts no one else's skill with a knife, his paranoia about poison creating rituals that transform every meal into a careful negotiation between hunger and survival. The contrast between public ceremony and private appetite reveals the exhausting nature of maintaining aristocratic performance, the relief that comes from moments when natural human impulses can be safely expressed. The foods consumed in private often differ dramatically from those served at public feasts. While official banquets feature elaborate presentations designed to impress observers, private meals focus on flavors and textures that provide genuine pleasure rather than political messaging. Exotic delicacies imported at enormous expense, spices that cost more than most people's annual income, ingredients whose very possession demonstrates wealth beyond imagination. You observe nobles savoring foods that would be completely unfamiliar to their subjects, sugar sculptures that dissolve on the tongue, wines aged in cellars that predate the current dynasty, fruits preserved by methods that seem almost magical in their ability to maintain freshness across seasons. The private consumption of these rarities reveals appetites that extend far beyond mere nutrition to encompass the desire for experiences unavailable to lesser mortals. These private meals become theatres for family drama that would be unthinkable in public. Yea, you witness a father berating his son for poor performance in the joust, The criticism delivered between courses of a meal that costs more than most annual salaries. A mother coaching her daughter in the subtle arts of flirtation, demonstrations of proper eye contact and strategic deployment of fans conducted over elaborate desserts. Siblings forming alliances against parents who threaten to arrange marriages they find distasteful. Their conspiracies planned between servings of dishes whose exotic origins reflect the global reach of English power. The weight of dynastic responsibility presses down on these private gatherings, turning every conversation into a negotiation about the family's future, every meal into a strategic planning session that will affect generations yet unborn. The sexual politics of Tudor nobility play out most clearly in these hidden spaces. You observe the careful dance between husbands and wives who must produce heirs, while navigating the treacherous waters of personal desire and political necessity. Some couples you serve have clearly found genuine affection despite their arranged marriages, their private tenderness, a sharp contrast to their formal public behavior. Others exist in a state of armed neutrality, their bedchambers becoming battlegrounds, where the future of estates and titles hangs in the balance. The pressure to produce male heirs creates an atmosphere of constant evaluation, where every intimate encounter carries the weight of dynastic survival. That you witness the private consultations with physicians, astrologers, and herbalists, whose advice shapes the most intimate aspects of noble marriages, their recommendations affecting everything from diet to sleeping arrangements in pursuit of the sons who will secure family fortunes. The bedchambers of the great houses reveal truths about power that no public ceremony could convey. These rooms, decorated with tapestries that cost more than entire estates, serve as stages where the most crucial dramas of succession are performed. You observe the elaborate rituals that surround the consummation of marriage, the careful documentation of intimate encounters that might produce heirs, the religious ceremonies that bless union designed more for political advantage than personal happiness. The beds themselves become symbols of authority, their ornate construction and precious fabrics proclaiming the importance of activities conducted within their curtained privacy. State beds, designed to accommodate witnesses during crucial moments of succession, transform the most intimate human experiences into public theatre performed before carefully selected audiences, whose testimony might one day determine the legitimacy of potential heirs. The private libraries and studies of the great houses reveal the intellectual lives of people often dismissed as mere ornaments of power. Your dust shelves lined with volumes in Latin, Greek, and French, text on philosophy, mathematics, and natural history that challenge the assumption that Tudor nobles were concerned only with fashion and intrigue. The books themselves, bound in leather tooled with family crests and personal mottos, represent wealth invested in knowledge rather than mere display. You watch as a countess corresponds with scholars across Europe, her letters discussing astronomical observations and alchemical experiments with the same intensity others reserve for gossip about court appointments. The marginalia in these private books, notes written in the owner's own hands, reveal minds grappling with intellectual challenges that extend far beyond the immediate concerns of political survival. The scientific instruments found in these private studies demonstrate the Renaissance passion for understanding natural phenomena, astrolabes, crafted by master artisans, their brass surfaces etched with calculations that unlock the movements of celestial bodies. Alchemical apparatus designed to transform base metals into gold, the equipment representing not just scientific curiosity, but desperate attempts to solve the financial problems that constantly plague even the wealthiest nobles. Mathematical texts annotated with practical applications, their theoretical principles applied to problems of estate management, military engineering, and architectural design. These intellectual pursuits, conducted in private chambers away from the suspicious eyes of those who might question the orthodoxy of particular investigations, reveal minds engaged with the cutting edge of Renaissance thought. The relationship between nobles and their most trusted servants develops layers of complexity that would be impossible in public settings. Over years of intimate service, you become repository of secrets that could destroy reputations and topple governments. You know which lords suffer from what they euphemistically call melancholy, observing the private symptoms of depression and anxiety that would be seen as weaknesses if revealed to political rivals, which ladies take potions to prevent pregnancy, their fear of childbirth or desire to control the timing of succession creating dependencies on herbalists whose knowledge borders on the forbidden, which marriages exist only on paper while the partners conduct discreet affairs with others, the careful choreography required to maintain appearances while pursuing genuine emotional connections. This knowledge creates a strange intimacy, making you simultaneously the most important and most vulnerable person in these households. The emotional lives of the Tudor elite, concealed behind masks of aristocratic reserve, reveal themselves only in the most private moments. You witness breakdowns that would shock those who see these nobles only in their public roles. Powerful figures reduced to tears by pressures that seem almost supernatural in their intensity. The isolation that comes with ultimate responsibility, the understanding that every decision might affect thousands of lives, creates psychological burdens that few humans can sustain without support. Some nobles find solace in religious devotion, their private chapels becoming refuges where the weight of earthly authority can be temporarily surrendered to divine will. Others seek escape through intellectual pursuits, losing themselves in studies that provide relief from the constant demands of political calculation. Still others find comfort in the arms of lovers who see them as human beings rather than symbols of power. These relationships offering emotional sustenance that formal marriages often cannot provide. The private correspondence of the elite, which you help to write, seal, and dispatch, reveals networks of information and influence that span continents. You watch as a seemingly simple letter about hunting plans actually conveys intelligence about troop movements, the innocent discussion of pursuing deer masking, detailed reports about military preparations in neighboring kingdoms, as discussions of new fashions mask negotiations for military alliances, the description of particular fabrics and colors conveying coded information about the availability of soldiers and supplies, as complaints about servants hide coded instructions for espionage activities, the seemingly domestic concerns actually managing intelligence networks that extend throughout Europe. The art of writing letters that appear innocent while carrying dangerous meanings becomes a skill as essential as dancing or swordplay, requiring years of practice to master the subtle techniques that allow vital information to be transmitted without detection. The cipher systems used in this correspondence represent sophisticated approaches to information security. Simple letter substitutions give way to complex systems based on astronomical calculations, their keys changing according to predetermined schedules that make interception nearly useless without access to master codes. Musical notation employed to disguise military intelligence, the apparent discussions of compositions actually conveying detailed information about fortifications and troop strengths. Mechanical symbols repurposed to represent political figures, allowing frank discussion of sensitive topics through metaphors drawn from natural philosophy. These encoding methods, developed over years of careful refinement, create languages within languages that allow the Tudor elite to communicate with unprecedented security about matters that could cost lives if discovered by hostile forces. The private religious observances of noble families often contrast sharply with their public displays of piety. In their personal chapels, you witness genuine moments of spiritual struggle that reveal the human costs of wielding divine authority. A duke praying for guidance about whether to support a rebellion, his anguish visible as he wrestles with decisions that could determine the fate of thousands. A duchess begging forgiveness for sins she cannot confess to any priest. A private guilt creating burdens that no earthly absolution can relieve. The children being taught prayers in languages that could cost their lives if overheard. The preservation of forbidden religious traditions creating dangerous knowledge that each generation must decide whether to preserve or abandon. These intimate encounters with faith reveal the terror that comes with power, the constant awareness that divine judgment awaits those who wield earthly authority. The private altars in noble bedchambers, decorated with precious metals and stones that reflect the owner's wealth, become stages for spiritual dramas that determine how power will be exercised in the temporal world. The religious artifacts found in these private spaces tell stories of faith that often contradict public religious allegiances. Hidden rosaries discovered in Protestant households, their presence revealing private loyalty to the old faith, despite public conformity to religious reform. Banned books concealed behind false walls, their dangerous texts preserving theological arguments that could justify resistance to established authority. Private correspondence with exiled religious figures, the letters revealing ongoing connections to religious movements that officially ceased to exist. These secret religious practices, maintained at the cost of constant fear of discovery, demonstrate the profound personal costs of religious revolution that swept through Tudor England. The nobles who preserved these dangerous connections risked not just their own lives, but the destruction of their entire families. Yet many chose to maintain spiritual traditions that provided meaning beyond the immediate rewards of political conformity. The management of vast household establishments requires skills that rival those of military commanders. You watch as the lady of the house oversees an operation that feeds hundreds of people daily, maintains dozens of buildings, and coordinates the activities of servants whose numbers rival those of small armies. Her private study becomes a command center where she tracks expenditures that would bankrupt merchants, manages political relationships that could alter the balance of power, and makes decisions that affect the livelihoods of entire communities. The account books that record these activities, written in hands trained to create permanent records of temporary wealth, reveal the staggering complexity of maintaining aristocratic lifestyle. Every entry represents dozens of individual transactions, each purchase carefully considered for its political as well as practical implications. The seasonal migrations between different estates require logistical planning that would challenge modern corporations. The movement of entire households involving hundreds of people and thousands of individual items that must be transported, protected and accounted for with military precision. The private moments between parents and children in noble families carry weight unknown to common folk. You observe lessons that go far beyond reading and mathematics. Children learning to read the subtle expressions that reveal political alliances, practicing the art of saying one thing while meaning another, mastering the delicate balance between submission and assertion that will determine their survival in a world where royal favor can vanish overnight. These tutorials in survival disguised as education reveal the profound loneliness of power, the isolation that comes with knowing that every relationship might be a trap, every friendship a potential betrayal, every moment of genuine emotion a vulnerability that enemies can exploit. The children of the Tudor elite grow up understanding that their every action affects not just their own futures, but the survival of everyone who depends upon their family's continued prosperity. The weight of this knowledge creates personalities shaped by caution and calculation, their natural childhood impulses carefully channeled into behaviors that will serve political purposes rather than personal satisfaction. The toys and games provided for noble children reflect the serious purposes that underlie even recreational activities. Miniature armies that teach military strategy, their deployment teaching lessons about tactics that might one day be applied to real battlefields. Board games that simulate political negotiations, their rules designed to develop skills in alliance building and strategic betrayal that will prove essential in adult court life. Musical instruments that provide training in the arts of performance and emotional manipulation, their mastery teaching children how to create desired effects in audiences whose favor might determine their future success. Even the dolls given to young girls serve educational purposes, their elaborate costumes providing lessons in the symbolic language of dress, while their care teaches the management skills that will be required for running large households. These seemingly innocent diversions prepare children for lives where every pleasure must serve political purposes, where spontaneous joy becomes a luxury that few can afford. The illness and aging of the powerful take on dimensions that extend far beyond personal suffering. You tend to lords and ladies whose physical decline threatens the stability of regions, whose death could alter the religious character of the realm, whose inability to produce heirs might trigger wars of succession. Their private chambers become stages where the personal and political intersect most dramatically. A slight fever becomes a matter of state. A difficult pregnancy could determine the fate of thousands. A bout of melancholy might reshape international relations. The physicians who attend these powerful patients carry responsibilities that extend far beyond medical care, their diagnoses affecting markets, their treatments influencing foreign policy, their discretion protecting state secrets that could destabilize governments if revealed. You observe the careful negotiations that surround even minor illnesses, the political calculations that influence medical decisions, the ways in which personal health becomes a matter of national security when the patient wields ultimate authority. The private remedies employed by the Tudor elite reveal approaches to medicine that blend scientific observation with magical thinking. Exotic herbs imported from distant continents, their alleged properties based on ancient texts, whose accuracy cannot be verified, but whose expense guarantees exclusivity. Astrological consultations that determine the timing of medical treatments. The positioning of celestial bodies influencing decisions about when to purge humors or apply particular medications. Alchemical preparations that promise to restore youth or enhance fertility. Their mysterious ingredients representing hope for solutions to problems that conventional medicine cannot address. These treatments, administered in private chambers away from skeptical observers, reveal the desperate desire for control over forces that threaten to overwhelm even the most powerful individuals. As the expense of these exotic remedies, often costing more than entire estates, demonstrates the lengths to which nobles will go in pursuit of health advantages that might extend their ability to wield power. The artistic patronage that defines Tudor culture often begins in these intimate settings. You witness the first conversations between nobles and the artists they support, watching as paintings are commissioned not just for beauty but for political messages that will be read by informed observers. Musicians hired not only for their skill, but for their discretion in carrying messages between great houses, their performances providing cover for communications that cannot be entrusted to conventional means. Poets whose verses celebrate noble virtues while simultaneously encoding criticism of rival families. Their apparently innocent compositions carrying barbed commentary that can destroy reputations without explicit accusation. The magnificent culture we associate with the Tudor period emerges from countless private guerrillas between power and creativity, each work of art representing not just aesthetic achievement but political calculation designed to advance particular interests, while diminishing others. The private workshops attached to great houses produce objects that never appear in public, but serve crucial political purposes. Skilled craftsmen create forged documents that support dubious legal claims, their expertise in mimicking historical writing styles, allowing the creation of evidence that can alter inheritance patterns. The jewelers design pieces that incorporate hidden compartments, their mechanical genius creating ornaments that can conceal poisons, coded messages, or miniature weapons disguised as decorative elements. The painters produce portraits that deliberately distort features to make subjects appear more or less attractive, depending on political necessities, their skills employed to create visual propaganda that influences marriage negotiations and diplomatic relationships. These secret crafts, practiced in chambers that appear on no official plans, represent the shadow economy of political power, where artistic skill serves purposes that official culture cannot acknowledge. As the evening hours deepen and the great houses settle into quieter rhythms, you observe the private rituals that prepare the elite for sleep. The removal of the elaborate costumes that have armored them through the day reveals bodies that are often frail, skin marked by the diseases that wealth cannot prevent, minds weighed down by responsibilities that grow heavier with each passing year. Yet even in these moments of vulnerability, power never fully sleeps. Important letters arrive at midnight, urgent messengers demand immediate audience, and the great game of Tudor politics continues even in the darkness. And the night chambers become command centers, where decisions affecting thousands are made in whispered conversations, their participants dressed in nightgowns that cost more than most people's lifetime earnings. Sleep itself becomes a political act. The choice of bed partners, the timing of rest, the very quality of dreams becoming matters that affect the governance of the realm. The private nighttime rituals reveal the psychological costs of maintaining absolute authority throughout daylight hours. Some nobles require elaborate ceremonies to achieve sleep, their minds so accustomed to constant vigilance that relaxation becomes impossible without careful preparation. Others suffer from insomnia that seems to be the price of wielding power over life and death. Their sleepless hours filled with planning that never ends because the responsibilities never diminish. The medications employed to induce rest, exotic preparations whose recipes are guarded as state secrets, represent attempts to purchase peace of mind that no amount of worldly authority can guarantee. You observe the transformation that occurs when these powerful figures finally surrender to sleep, their faces relaxing into expressions of vulnerability that would be shocking to those who know them only in their public roles. In these moments, the distance between ruler and ruled disappears, revealing the common humanity that underlies even the most elaborate pretensions to divine authority. In these private chambers, behind the velvet curtains and golden tapestries, the true cost of power becomes visible. The Tudor elite lived lives of magnificent isolation, surrounded by luxury, but constantly threatened by the very forces that elevated them. Their private moments reveal not gods walking among mortals, but human beings carrying burdens that would crush ordinary souls, finding whatever comfort they could in a world where today's favorite might be tomorrow's traitor, where the crown that elevates also condemns, where the price of greatness is the freedom to be simply, quietly, peacefully human. These hidden truths, preserved in the memories of trusted servants who witnessed the private struggles behind public grandeur, remind us that power comes with costs that no amount of wealth or authority can eliminate. that the magnificence of the Tudor age was built upon foundations of human sacrifice that extended far beyond the celebrated victims whose names history remembers. In understanding these private realities, we begin to comprehend the true nature of authority in any age, the eternal tension between public performance and private truth that shapes the lives of all who seek to wield power over their fellow human beings. As our journey through the hidden world of Tudor England draws to a close, let your mind settle on the contrast between the glittering surface of this golden age and the complex human reality that lay beneath. We have walked in the worn shoes of servants who rose before dawn to maintain the illusion of royal magnificence, witnessed the tragic fall of a queen through the eyes of those who knew her most intimately, explored the secret passages that concealed the palace's most dangerous truths, and glimpsed the private struggles of those who wielded power over millions while battling their own fears and desires. The Tudor court that captivates our imagination was built upon the labor of thousands, whose names history rarely remembers, sustained by the silence of servants who saw everything and said nothing, and protected by secrets that still whisper through the hidden passages of palaces that stand to this day. In their stories we find not the romantic fantasy of historical fiction, but something far more valuable, the recognition that human courage, sacrifice, and resilience transcend the boundaries of time and social station. Tonight, as you rest in comfort that Tudor servants could barely imagine, surrounded by safety they could never take for granted, perhaps you'll spare a thought for those who made possible the magnificent world we remember. Their struggles remind us that every age has its hidden costs, every golden period its shadows, and every great achievement its unsung heroes, whose only monument is the quiet satisfaction of knowing they served something larger than themselves. Sleep well, knowing that the dramas of the past have settled into the peaceful rhythm of history, their urgency transformed into stories that comfort rather than threaten, their terrors softened by the passage of centuries into tales that can lull rather than disturb. The Tudors and their servants have found their rest at last, and in their silence we can find our own peaceful dreams,